I didn't expect the knock to sound like a deadline, but that's how it landed. 3 quick raps on my bedroom door, my dad's voice through the wood, and a paper in his hand that made my mouth go dry. "You have 48 hours to get your stuff out," he said, not looking at my face, his eyes fixed just past my shoulder like he was reading a cue card. "Your sister owns this house now." The words felt heavy and practiced, like someone had told him to say them a certain way. I was still in my old high school sweatshirt, the one with a peeling tiger on the chest, and a local news anchor on the TV was talking about an overnight crash on I-71 while last night's baseball highlights rolled in the corner. The room smelled like coffee I hadn't finished and a lemon candle I light when I'm trying to work. I stood up so fast my knee hit the desk and rattled the jar of pens. Dad held out a folded document, talking before I could. "We signed a transfer," he said, and he tried for a smile that didn't come. "It's done. Title's in Nora's name." He said her name softly, like laying flowers on a table. My sister's face flashed in my head, perfect eyeliner, capable of making a grocery list sound like a performance review. He added the part he must have known would feel like a shove. "It's her mortgage now, her rules. She wants you out by Friday night." I looked at the clock, Wednesday, 9:17 a.m., and felt a dumb, practical calculation slide in. 48 hours means 2 sunrises and a sore back. My throat did that tight thing, and I tasted the metallic tang of adrenaline. I took the paper. It had a notary stamp and the kind of crisp black ink that makes bad news look official. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice even, because if I let it lift I'd spill everything. "I live here. My mail, my job, my entire life is in this room." "You can't just," he cut me off with a line he pulls out when he doesn't want to pick a side. "This is the way it has to be, Liv. It's best for the family." He stepped back like he'd been told to keep distance. The hall smelled like fried eggs, the radio in the kitchen was low, a talk host arguing about pitching rotations like it mattered more than mortgages. Through the window I could see our maple dropping early leaves even though it was only the first Monday of August. In my chest, something both old and new clicked into place. He headed down the hall, and Nora appeared like she'd been waiting for her cue. She wore a blazer I recognized from a department store sale and a serious expression that fit the outfit. "I'm not doing this to be mean," she said in a tone people use right before they are. "I can't carry you anymore. Taxes are late. The roof needs patching. I can't have dead weight in a house with a mortgage." She handed me a typed list with bullet points and the kind of words people pick when they want to sound like a bank. 48 hours. "I'll be back Friday at 6 to do a walkthrough." She glanced at my suitcase under the bed like she'd already packed it for me. I swallowed and made my voice too calm to measure as panic. "You can't evict a person who's lived here for years by printing a list from the internet," I said. "That's not how any of this works." She lifted an eyebrow in a way that used to make me feel 12. "You're not on the deed," she said. "You're a guest. Guests can be uninvited." The edge of the paper bit my fingers. I could hear the washing machine humming in the garage, the sound of our ordinary life, not caring what the ink on this page said. That night, I sat on my bed with the paper spread in front of me, my laptop open to 3 tabs I didn't want to need: county recorder, tenant rights, quitclaim deeds. I called my friend Shay, who runs the front desk at a title company off Cleveland Avenue and knows exactly what to say so you don't cry on the phone. She listened without interrupting, and I could picture her with a pen between her teeth and her elbows on her keyboard. "Okay," she said, "first things first. Has a new deed been recorded?" I told her I didn't know. She said, "Then don't take Nora's paper as gospel just because it has a stamp. Get the official one. The recorder's office is open 8 to 4:30. Go first thing." She paused, then added, "And live 48 hours isn't how actual evictions work here. If they try to call the police to remove a trespasser, that officer will ask to see a court order. They don't have one. Keep your voice even and your phone on video if it comes to it. My palms were damp. I turned on the box fan and let it blow cool air across my face. If this is real, I asked, keeping my question narrow, can she actually kick me out? Shay exhaled. Not by Friday, she said. And not without a judge. Go get the paper first. At 8 the next morning, the recorder's office smelled like toner and stale air, the way every building like this smells, the way my nerves always recognize. A woman named Connie, who has been behind that counter since my senior year, slid the terminal sign in toward me and asked how my dad's back was doing, which made my throat pinch for a second. I typed in our address with fingers that wanted to shake and held still until the index spat out exactly what I didn't want. A recorded transfer 2 weeks earlier, a line that moved the house from my parents to Nora for $10 and love. I printed it and paid the $1 and stood in the lobby pretending not to need the wall. It was clean. It was done. The paper in my hand matched the paper Dad had held out. On the way out, I ran into our neighbor from 2 doors down, the one who runs the Saturday garage sale every month like it's a NATO summit. She asked if I was helping my big sis with paint swatches, and I smiled with my mouth only. I'm picking up paperwork, I said, which wasn't untrue. She sniffed in that way retirees do when they smell family trouble. Tell her the city's ticketing on trash day, she said. Better bring those cans in before the game's over. The details of my life remembered themselves while my core tried not to melt. By noon, I'd made a list with an ugly title, What I Can Control. Call HR to switch my mailing address if I needed to leave fast. Ask Aunt June if I could borrow her basement for boxes. She lives 8 miles away and keeps her dehumidifier on like a hobby. Find out whether the notice on the kitchen table about the tax bill was as late as it looked. Underline twice. Do not argue with Nora in the doorway like it's a TV show. My hands felt prickly, and my throat had that dry scrape that makes cold water feel like medicine. At 4:30, just as Connie was locking the recorder's office doors for the day, Nora texted me a photo of a tape measure. Please start packing, she wrote. I'll need to reconfigure rooms for a home office. My thumbs hovered for a full minute. I typed, I saw the recorded deed. I'm not contesting the transfer right now. But this isn't a legal eviction. You know I've lived here. I pay bills. I do the HOA admin. If you want me out, you'll need to file in court or we'll go to mediation. I deleted or grow a conscience because helpful is the only lever I had left that might move her. She wrote back in 12 seconds. I don't want to make this ugly. Please be a team player for once. I put my phone face down and breathed. Dad came home after 6 with a paper bag of takeout and a look that said he'd been chosen for a side he didn't want. Chinese, he asked, like egg rolls could patch anything. We ate in front of the TV because that's what we do when it's too hard to look each other in the eye. He watched the baseball recap with interest that felt forced, cheerfully pointing out a triple like he hadn't just told his child she was luggage to be moved. Halfway through, he reached for a fortune cookie and read it aloud. A difficult road is easier with a friend, he said, and then he folded the tiny strip and tucked it in his pocket like he didn't know how sharp it sounded in this room. I slept badly, waking every hour with my heart going like I'd run a mile. At 3 a.m., I got up, made tea, and wrote a list of the things I'd do if I had to leave in 2 days. My passport, my W-2s, the shoebox of Polaroids from the summer we camped at Indian Lake, Mom's ring in the blue velvet pouch. I took 2 sips, cold by then, and stared at the ceiling until the hum of the fridge felt like company. Thursday morning, Nora brought a clipboard and a smile that didn't reach anywhere and started measuring my closet. You don't have to do this with a clipboard, I said. You can talk to me like a person. She pretended not to hear and asked if I would need help moving my dresser to the curb. I kept my voice flat. I'm not leaving Friday. I'll be at church Sunday, and I'll be at work Monday, and if you want me out, you can put your name on a filing and pay the fee like everyone else." Her jaw twitched. "This is why you don't get invited to things," she said, and it sounded like a sentence she'd been saving for a year. "You make everything a process." By noon, we were no longer speaking. By 2, Ryan showed up, because there's always a Ryan in a story like this, a boyfriend who thinks being loud is the same as being right. He's not a bad person, just a man who loves a power stance. He stood in my doorway and crossed his arms like he imagined paperwork would be afraid. 48 hours, he said, tapping my door frame with his knuckle. "We'll help load." I stared at his hand, then at his face. "Are you planning to carry me out too?" I asked, calm enough to make him shift. "Because that's called assault." "Do you want the police here for your home office setup?" Nora pulled him back into the hall. "We're not doing this," she said tightly. "We're not making a scene." My heart slowed by half a beat. I sat down on the bed and wrote another line in my notebook. "They want a scene. Don't give them one. Give them paperwork." The first escalation came that night when I walked into the kitchen for water and found the Wi-Fi password reset and the router's little green lights blinking like a warning. The sticky note with the old password was gone from the side of the fridge, the space a clean square where tape had been. I stood there under the humming fluorescent light and felt a laugh bubble up that wasn't funny at all. I turned on my phone's hotspot and kept moving. In the morning, my key didn't turn the deadbolt on the side door. Someone had added a chain. A printed sign appeared in the hallway above the thermostat. "No egg-C after 10 p.m. Costs are too high." I snapped a photo and texted it to Shay. She texted back one word, "document," and a second, "breathe." Friday noon, a patrol car rolled slow in front of our house, then parked across the street. A young officer stepped out, not in a rush, hat in hand. He rang the bell and backed up 3 feet like the training video told him to. I opened the door because I refused to hide from things I didn't do. "We got a call," he said, calm, almost bored. Caller reported a domestic situation and a person refusing to leave. He looked over my shoulder and saw my suitcase in the hall and my labeled boxes and the neat stack of file folders on the kitchen table. "Are you okay?" he asked me quietly. I said yes. I said I lived here, that I'd lived here for years, that a deed transfer to a relative doesn't bypass court process. He nodded because he'd had this conversation before and because this neighborhood sends him to cats in trees and cousins who don't read. He asked to speak to my dad and to Nora. They appeared with the nervous, bright energy of people who think a uniform will seal an argument. "We need her out," Nora said. "The house is mine now." The officer kept his voice even. "That may be," he said, "but she has residency here. You'll need an eviction order to remove her. If you want to keep the peace, I can recommend mediation at the community center." Ryan puffed up. "So she can just squat?" The officer glanced at his notepad like it would help. "That's not the word I'd use," he said. "And not my call. Talk to the clerk of courts if you want the steps." He looked at me again, steady. "If anyone puts hands on anyone, call us." Then he handed Nora a card with a number for a mediation group, and the energy in the room dropped like a ball losing its bounce. The officer left without writing anything, which felt like a gift. The house went quiet except for the dishwasher and a neighbor's mower 2 doors down. I stood next to the sink and watched a line of ants find a crumb of something sweet and carry it away in a straight, determined line. Dad rested his knuckles on the counter. "This got away from us," he said, his voice small. Nora snapped. "She got away from us," which landed like a rebuke and a confession. I took a breath and kept it measured. "This doesn't have to be war," I said. "We can go to the community center. We can write down rules that adults sign. Or we can keep playing pretend with signs above thermostats and chain locks, and I'll keep taking pictures until a judge reads them." Nora looked at me like I'd spoken a language she refused to learn. You always were dramatic, she said. 48 hours means 48 hours. Then she walked out, clipboard under her arm like a shield. I spent the last hours of Friday moving my things not out of the house, but out of my room and into neat stacks along the wall near the dining room arch, where everyone could see that my life wasn't a pile. It was labeled and squared and not going quietly into a trunk. I took Aunt June up on her basement offer for the boxes I could live without for a month, winter clothes, high school yearbooks, the snow globe collection mom, and I started when she still loved buying silly things for us both. I kept my basics. I laid out my work clothes for Monday because structure makes my body stop shaking. At 5:52 p.m., 8 minutes before the supposed walkthrough, I taped a note at eye level on my door. I am not refusing to leave. I am refusing to be removed without a court order. Mediation is scheduled for Tuesday at 6 p.m., Community Center, Room B. I printed a second copy and slid it under Nora's door in a quiet way that felt like pulling a pin and placing it carefully on a shelf. I ate a bowl of cereal because the kitchen smelled like stress and cereal smells like nothing. The clock flipped to 6 and the doorbell rang. I wiped my palms on my jeans and opened it. Nora stood with a clipboard and a tight mouth. Ryan had a phone up, already recording, the camera eye blinking. Dad hovered, hands in his pockets, the way he does when nothing he says will fix anything and he knows it. Nora took one step inside and walked down the hall like a landlord. She clicked her pen and made notes about scuffs that existed before I was born. You've done nothing, she said, looking at my still-made bed and the safe stack of labeled boxes. I lifted my own list, one I'd typed, printed, and signed. Mediation Tuesday 6 p.m. Confirmed. Recorder's deed printed. 8/3. Police call documented. Incident card. HR address change pending. Aunt June's storage partial. She stared at it. This is ridiculous, she said. You think you're a lawyer? I shook my head. I think I'm a person who reads. That's all. She made a sound that was half laugh, half something bitter, and scribbled a final note. You have until Sunday night, she said, like a generous queen, and then we change the locks. Dad winced. Ryan's phone wobbled a little. I held the officer's mediation card up so the camera could see it. Sunday night you'll have a mediation appointment 2 days later and a judge's number if you want to explain why you jumped the line, I said. My voice didn't shake. In my chest, the click I'd felt 2 days ago made itself solid. This wasn't going to be a scene. It was going to be a calendar. When they left, the house exhaled. I sat on the floor with my back against my bed and texted Shay, mediation Tuesday. Officer said same. Deed is real. 48 hours turned into Sunday night bluff. She replied, good. Bring a folder. Wear navy. Don't take the bait. I looked around my room, the posters I never took down, the dent in the carpet where Mom's old dresser feet had been, the curtain rod Dad hung crooked and never fixed. The air had that late summer thickness that makes you aware of your own skin. I lay down on top of the blanket and watched the ceiling fan thrum the heat into a bearable hum. I didn't know then that the paper in my folder contained more than a deed. I didn't know that the transfer included a clause my parents had slid past themselves and handed to my sister with a bow, a right of occupancy buried in the language that would turn the next 2 weeks into a different kind of fight. I didn't know that an ally who looks like the last person you'd call for help would show up with a highlighter and a sense of humor just when the floor under my feet tilted. All I knew was that Tuesday at 6 I'd sit in a room that smelled like floor cleaner and coffee and say out loud that my home wasn't a pile of boxes on a schedule. And I'd bring the paper. And I'd make them read it. Saturday felt like it had a timer running in the corner of my vision, even though no one said the words out loud. I woke to the sound of the mower 2 doors down and the local station giving the forecast humid, chance of a late storm, and lay there a minute with my hand on the folder like it could steady my pulse. The house had that early morning quiet that never lasts, the kind where you can hear the fridge hum and the hallway clock tick, and I tried to match my breathing to something that didn't care whether I lived here or in Aunt June's basement. By 9, I was boxing the easy stuff, paperbacks with cracked spines, sweaters I wouldn't need for months, the shoebox of Polaroids that still smelled faintly like the attic where Mom kept the camera, and hauling the lighter boxes to my trunk. I took 2 to Aunt June's and drove the 8 miles with the windows down because the AC in my Corolla gives up when it's hot, and I listened to a replay of last night's baseball game to keep my brain from chewing on itself. Aunt June met me in her driveway with 2 cold bottles of water and a hug that lasted just long enough to reset something in my chest. "You can stack in the laundry corner," she said, as if we'd rehearsed this, and then she handed me a bag of granola bars like I was heading to a double shift. Back at the house, Nora had taped a note above the thermostat in a straight line like a badge. "No AC after 10 p.m. Costs are too high," which made me laugh without smiling, because a sign doesn't become a policy when you live with people. She had also stacked 3 plastic bins by the couch and labeled them keep, donate, and trash in marker like she expected me to submit things for approval. I moved the bins to the side with a chair scrape loud enough to signal that I wasn't playing pretend. Around noon, Dad hovered in the kitchen making a sandwich he didn't eat. He asked if I wanted mustard, which is his way of wanting to say something and failing. I poured myself a glass of water and noticed the Wi-Fi had been reset again. The sticky note with the password had been replaced with a note that read, "Ask the owner," which was a sentence meant to sting. I turned on my hotspot and kept going. By 2, Ryan showed up in gym shorts and a cap pulled low, the uniform men wear when they plan to carry heavy things and their opinions. He leaned in my doorway and crossed his arms like a cartoon. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said, and his tone put me back in 7th grade when a hall monitor thought the right voice could move bodies. I kept packing my desk drawers without looking at him. "I'm making it legal," I said. "Those aren't the same thing." He glanced down the hall as if a camera might be rolling. "We're trying to be generous," he said. "Nora's being patient." I put my stapler in the bubble wrap because it makes me feel better to pretend office supplies deserve protection. "Tell her thank you for moving Sunday night," I said. "The officer's card is on the fridge if she forgets the part about the judge." He exhaled like a tire losing air and backed away. The first actual hit came from a direction I should have predicted, the neighborhood Facebook group. Around 3, my friend Sheila from down the block texted a screenshot of a post from Nora S. No last name, but we all know each other, complaining about grown children taking advantage of their parents' generosity and asking whether anyone had experience with removing an adult guest who refuses to leave. The comments warmed fast. Half the replies were advice about small claims court from people who confuse shows with statutes. The other half were empathy for a homeowner under stress. One lone voice wrote, "Renter rights exist," and got jumped for being rude to property owners. I put my phone face down and sat on the carpet with my knees up until the knot behind my sternum loosened enough for a deep breath. Then I texted Pastor Matt at the community center to confirm Tuesday's mediation room because a paper on a wall is only as strong as the person who put it there. He wrote back within 5 minutes, "Room B, 6 p.m., coffee on, bring your folder," which made me want to cry and didn't. Sunday is always the hardest day to be mad in public in our town because half of us see each other at church and the other half see us in the grocery store parking lot. I sat with Aunt June in the 3rd pew from the back and kept my hands folded so I wouldn't gesture my way into tears. The sanctuary smelled like lemon cleaner and old wood. The bulletin had a typo about the rummage sale that would make someone laugh later. Pastor Matt preached on speaking truth gently, which made me feel seen and slightly surveilled. After the benediction, Dad met us by the steps with that too bright smile he uses when he wants to convince himself the weather is fine. "Lunch at Gus's?" he asked, and I said yes because pancakes can be a truce. We sat at the counter where we always do, a baseball game played muted over the coffee pots. Dad stirred his cup too long and then reached into his pocket. He set down a folded paper and tapped it once. "Your mother and I signed this," he said, not quite looking at me. "We thought we were doing right by both of you." I unfolded it with cautious hands. It was a copy of the deed transfer, no surprises there, and then a second page I hadn't seen in the index because I hadn't clicked the related documents link like a person who knows they should. Use and occupancy rider, 2 pages, dense. A notary stamp that made my stomach go cold. The clause wasn't a life estate. It wasn't a lease. It was a thing Shay had mentioned once after closing, a right of occupancy for named family members for up to 12 months after transfer, subject to reasonable conditions, with the names typed in a small font that made my eyes blur. Grantors reserve a right of occupancy for themselves and their adult child, Olivia Harper, for a period not to exceed 12 months following recording of deed or until alternate comparable housing is secured, whichever occurs first. I read the sentence twice, then a third time slower, tracing the words with my finger so my brain would stop trying to fix them. "Did you know this was in here?" I asked. Dad rubbed his temple. "The lawyer said it was standard when we said we wanted a cushion," he said. "We told Nora it was for us in case we needed to move back if we hated the condo. She may not have noticed the line about you." He winced on the may, a man hearing himself be generous in a stupid way. I stared at the writer until the letters felt like ants. "Dad," I said, working to keep my voice flat, "this means I am not a guest. I am not a squatter. I have a recorded right of occupancy for up to a year." He looked at the TV where the catcher was signaling for a curveball and nodded once small. "If that's what it says," he said, like paper could be lying. I folded it carefully and slid it into my folder where it belonged like a shield. "This changes Tuesday," I said, and the way my voice steadied made me feel 10 pounds lighter and 10 years older. He looked at me and then at his coffee, then back. "Be kind," he said, soft, not as a command, but as a habit we used to live by. I said I would try. I walked to the title company after lunch because Shay was working the half day, and I wanted someone who lives in contracts to tell me my eyes weren't playing tricks. The lobby smelled like carpet and the cheap candy dish mints all these places love. Shay had her hair in a bun with a pencil stuck through it and a stack of files that looked like a joke from a sitcom. "Tell me I'm reading this right," I said, and she pulled the writer into the light and traced the sentence with a pink highlighter like a teacher grading kindness. "You're reading it right," she said. "It's recorded, which means a judge will treat it like more than a wish. It's not a license you can yank because someone is cranky. It's a right." She flipped to the second paragraph and tapped a line. "And this is better," she said. "It says no termination without 30 days written notice and an opportunity to cure." That's lease language snuck into a writer because your parents hired someone who uses templates that protect people. Bless that boring lawyer. My throat prickled. "So on Tuesday I can walk in and say the word recorded like a magic spell," I said. Shay smiled. "You can say public record," she said, and watch the temperature in the room drop. Then she handed me a second highlighted copy in case someone pretends they can't read yellow. The rest of Sunday was tidy movements because tidy keeps me from spinning. I did laundry even though I might not be doing it here in a week. I made a list of what alternate comparable housing could mean in my price range with my salary, which on paper is fine and in practice looks smaller after health insurance. I texted Aunt June to ask if she thought her neighbor's basement studio would still be an option in September if I needed it. "We'll make room," she wrote back, which made a knot inside me soften just enough to let me breathe deeper. I ate cereal again for dinner because dinner with a fork makes me sit still too long when my brain wants to move. Monday, normal life tried to pretend it was still the boss. The records office had a rush of people pulling deeds to settle little fights that look big when you're mad. A fence 1 foot over, a shed that jumped the line between lots, a cousin claiming an extra sliver of yard because a tree leans. Connie slid me a stack of returns with a wink like my pile had been bigger than usual, and I filed them with hands that didn't shake. Around noon, a text from Nora buzzed. The neighborhood group is recommending I file an unlawful detainer. FYI. I typed and deleted twice before sending. I have a recorded right of occupancy for up to 12 months on the rider you didn't read. We'll go over it Tuesday with a neutral in the room. She didn't answer, but I pictured her face when she clicked the county index and saw her own rider glowing back at her like a mirror she didn't expect. Monday night, Ryan parked across the street and sat in his car for 10 minutes staring at the house like it was a scoreboard. He came to the door with an energy that made the tiny hairs on my arms lift. This rider thing doesn't mean you get to take over, he said. It's for parents. It says, grantors. That's your folks. I held his gaze. It says my name, I said, and I didn't raise my voice. It says, and their adult child, Olivia. It's recorded. If you want to argue with a stamp, I'll make popcorn. He looked past me into the living room where my boxes sat like polite furniture and tried to decide if he had a comeback. He didn't. He left with his shoulders up around his ears like weather. Tuesday came humid and gray. I wore my navy dress because neutral colors take the heat out of rooms, and I put my hair up because I think better when nothing's on my neck. I slid the rider and the deed and the police card into my folder behind the mediation letter. Dad drove himself and parked on the far side of the lot like his car could be neutral if he made it stand alone. Nora and Ryan arrived together. She had a notebook. He had that look men get when they think being firm will turn ink into air. Pastor Matt met us in the lobby with the kind of smile that says a room can be both soft and strict. The community center's room B smelled like floor cleaner and brewed coffee. Folding chairs were set in a square, no head of table. Matt opened with ground rules, one at a time, no recording, phones face down, and then said the quiet part out loud. You can leave with a plan, or you can leave with nothing, and the court will write the plan for you later. Nora started with a speech that sounded written in the car. Mortgages, responsibility. The words adult guest said with a little bite. I let her finish because I didn't come to argue feelings. When she stopped, I took a breath, opened my folder, and slid the rider onto the table like a card you don't play until the dealer finally asks. We can skip adult guest, I said. We can use the words we all agreed to when you recorded your deed. Right of occupancy for up to 12 months for the grantors and their adult child, Olivia. There's a 30-day notice provision. There's a cure period. This is public record. I watched her eyes snag on my name typed in that small font. Ryan leaned forward and squinted like the letters were trying to trick him. Pastor Matt didn't look surprised, which I appreciated more than I expected. He just clicked his pen and said, okay, then we make a schedule that respects the rider. Ryan tried for a Hail Mary. It says comparable housing, he said, tapping the line like he could make it wobble. So if we offer a room at her aunt's, I shook my head. It says until alternate comparable housing is secured, I said. Not offered. Secured. Which means I sign a lease I can afford in a location that lets me get to work in under an hour and doesn't require me to sleep next to a dehumidifier. Pastor Matt nodded, slow. We can define comparable so we don't fight about it later, he said. 2-bedroom not required, but private room, working kitchen, within 15 miles of her job, rent under X dollars. That sound like a way through. He looked at Nora, not Ryan, because he knows where decisions sit, even when husbands try to hold them up like trophies. Nora didn't answer at first. She was still reading the line with my name like she could erase it by scowling. Then she sat back and exhaled through her nose. "Fine," she said, voice thin. 3 months. And then she's out. 3 months is not 12, and I felt the argument rise in my chest like a flare, but I swallowed it because a step is still a step and not every hill needs a banner. 3 months with 30 days written notice and no lock changes, I said. And no cutoffs, no Wi-Fi games, no thermostat games, no chains on doors, no signs masquerading as rules. We write it down. We both sign. Pastor Matt looked relieved, like a man who has seen the same fight end 5 ways and prefers the one with paper. He drafted the line right then in sensible sentences. We added a clause about me paying a set amount toward utilities, so no one pretended I was a ghost on the bills, and a clause about the thermostat that made us all stare at each other for a second and then laugh, because sometimes even in the middle of a civil war you get a little joke to keep you human. Ryan refused to sign and then did. Nora signed without looking at me. Dad signed as a witness, his hand shaking a little like he'd forgotten how to steady a thing he started. I signed last, underlining the O in my name by accident like a teenager. The meeting should have ended there, but real life isn't tidy. Just as Pastor Matt stapled the pages, Nora slid a second document across the table with an expression that gave me that old 12-year-old feeling in my stomach. "There's one more thing," she said, and her tone made my shoulders climb an inch. It was a notice from the HOA fines for exterior storage with a photo of my boxes stacked near the dining arch, which is not an exterior, but we all know these committees love a rule when it lands on someone else. "You're making the house look like a moving truck parked indoors," she said. "If we get fined, you pay." I took the paper, studied the letterhead, and blinked once. "I do the books for this HOA," I said calmly. "There's no fine for inside stacks. Also, the picture is from your Facebook post. Also, if you want me to move the boxes to Aunt June's, I will. But don't try me with pretend letters." Pastor Matt looked at the paper, then at Nora, and raised an eyebrow in a way that could have passed for amusement if we weren't all tired. Nora tucked the letter back like she could undo the moment. When we left the community center, the sky had finally picked a side and was dumping a steady rain that made the parking lot smell like hot tar and earth. Dad stood with me under the overhang while Nora and Ryan jogged to their car. He looked at me like a man looking at a map that shows all the wrong roads. "I didn't read the fine print," he said, almost to himself. "I thought we were giving her a gift." I slid the folder under my arm so I could put a hand on his sleeve. "You gave her a house," I said. "You gave me a year that turns into 3 months because I made a deal to stop the bleeding. That's not nothing." He nodded once and watched the rain hit the puddle edge, little circles breaking each other. "I never wanted you to feel like luggage," he said. "I know," I said, "because I do, and I let it sit there, unsolved but named." The next 2 weeks were an exercise in acting like a person who isn't counting. Every day after work I looked at 2 apartment listings, just 2, not 20, one 6 miles away near the discount movie theater, one 11 miles past the park with a tiny balcony that could hold a chair if you didn't mind your knees. I wrote numbers on a pad and circled rent amounts that didn't make my stomach drop. I stopped reading the neighborhood thread because the people who live online don't pay my bills. I made a point of saying good morning to Nora in the kitchen even when she kept her eyes on her phone like the screen had better manners than I did. I paid $150 toward the utility bill the same day every week and slid the receipt under the fridge magnet that used to hold family Christmas photos and now holds appointment reminders and a coupon for a tire rotation none of us will remember to use. I lost some things too. HR moved my mail to APO. Box I rented for $78 for 6 months so I wouldn't get stuck when the final move day came, and there was a moment in that little post office where I almost sat on the floor because an address is a kind of spine. My friend Alyssa from high school stopped returning my texts after she posted a long comment under Nora's thread about entitled adults. And it's funny how losing a person you only have lunch with twice a year can feel like something heavy when everything else already is. I missed church one Sunday because I woke up with my throat tight for no good reason and sat in my car in the lot listening to the pregame host pretend a bullpen choice is life and death, and I breathed until I could get out without crying. 2 days before the end of the month, I found an apartment 9 miles away off Sunbury Road with a window that faced east and a rent number that made me put my hand on my neck just to feel my own pulse steady. The landlord was a woman who manages 3 small buildings and sells pies on weekends at the farmer's market. She talked about fixing things like it was a normal part of her life, not a favor. She asked for first month and half a deposit, and I slid my card across knowing exactly what remained in my account and what could live on a budget with less takeout and more eggs. I signed a lease that made my fingers tingle with relief and loss at the same time. "You can have the keys on the first Friday," she said. "You're lucky." A woman backed out for a job in Cincinnati, and I don't like leaving windows empty. I walked to my car under a sky that had decided on blue for once and sat with both hands on the wheel without starting it. Then I texted Pastor Matt, comparable secured, and Shay, keys Friday, and Aunt June, moving Saturday. Save me a corner, and Dad, I found a place, and I took a picture of the window because proof helps me breathe. The last Thursday before payday, Nora taped another note above the thermostat, and I laughed for real because the line had become a kind of comedy between us. "No laundry after 10, it said, and I wrote underneath in small, neat letters, "Agreed. See addendum." She didn't rip it down, which I took as progress. Ryan avoided my eyes for a full day and then asked, stiffly, if I would be requiring assistance with the move, which I translated as, "Do you want me to feel involved?" I told him no thanks. Dad told me he'd be there with his truck at 8 a.m. on Saturday and to stop him if he tried to lift anything his back hated. The community center printed a little mediation completed slip for our file because they like their paperwork tidy, and Pastor Matt handed it to me with a smile that felt like a benediction. The night before my move, I stood alone in my room with the light off and the hall light casting a slice across the carpet where the dresser used to sit, and I let myself feel the weight of leaving a place with a history written in dust and dents. Then I opened the folder one more time and smoothed the writer flat and read my name in small print, not to gloat, not to throw, but to thank the version of my parents who picked a lawyer who uses templates that imagine people will need grace. The right of occupancy had given me time to do this like an adult. It had taken the scene out of their hands and put it in a calendar. It had forced my sister to sit in a room and say fine and sign her name where a line waited. It didn't make us friends. It made us neighbors who share walls and a thermostat. It let me choose a window that faces east. I didn't tell Nora about the last page in my folder, the one I printed at the clerk's office during lunch, because I like to know the shape of a thing. It was a copy of the addendum we'd signed at mediation with the 3 months spelled out, but I had added a little line in my own neat hand under comparable secured new address on file with HR and Treasurer's office. Move date set for first Saturday. Forwarding active. It was a small sentence. It was also a hand on the wheel. For the first time all month, I slept hard and woke at 6 without an alarm, ready to carry my own boxes 9 miles east and call it a start. The first Friday came bright and a little cooler than the week had promised, the kind of morning that lets you keep the windows down without making your shirt stick. I picked up the keys from my new landlord at 9 sharp, standing in a small office that smelled like vanilla candles and dusted blinds. She handed me a ring with 2 brass keys and a chipped green fob for the laundry room and talked me through trash day and the weird way the front door sticks if you don't lift as you push. I walked into the apartment and stood in the middle of the empty living room with the east light laying a clean rectangle on the floor. The window rattled a little when a truck went by. The stove ticked when I turned a burner on and off just to feel how it worked. I ran water in the bathroom sink and listened to the pipes settle like they were clearing their throats. I took a photo of the empty room with my phone and sent it to Aunt June and to Shay and to Pastor Matt with a single word each time, keys, and each reply buzzed back with a small cheer that made my shoulders finally drop a notch. I drove back to the house with a roll of tape and a knot in my stomach that wasn't going to go away just because the sky had decided to be kind. Dad had the truck already backed into the driveway like a pro, tailgate down, old quilt spread over the bed so my dresser wouldn't collect splinters. He wore his faded cap from the county fair and the back brace he pretends doesn't exist until I catch him tightening it. He clapped once and said, "Let's load before the humidity remembers what month it is." I nodded and tried to keep my hands from shaking as I started with the light boxes. We carried in a steady rhythm. The seasons of my life in cardboard, the things that make rooms make sense. Around 9:30, the neighbor from 2 doors down who runs the garage sales walked over with styrofoam cups of coffee and a plastic bag of donuts that had sweated in the morning air. She said she heard we were moving and that she liked the way I labeled my boxes. People who write neat build neat lives, she said, and I tucked that away like a tiny stone in my pocket for later. Nora stood in the doorway with her arms folded the way she does when she wants the walls to know she's in charge. She wore a cardigan even though the day didn't need one and had a spiral notebook pressed to her chest like a shield. Ryan hovered behind her pretending to supervise, which mostly meant pointing to things I had already lifted. "Please don't scratch the floor," she said when Dad and I maneuvered the dresser through the living room. Dad glanced at her, then at the floor, then at me. "It already has a scratch from when we moved it in 2006, he said, which didn't help as much as he probably thought it did. I kept my mouth closed because the only thing that would make today worse would be saying the sentence I wanted to say. We had the first load strapped and ready by 10:15 when a silver sedan rolled to a stop at the curb and a woman with a clipboard stepped out. She wore the efficient flats of someone who walks houses for a living and had a badge clipped to her belt that read Appraisal Services. She checked the address against her sheet, then looked up with a practiced smile. "Nora Harper?" she asked. Nora straightened like she'd been waiting for a parade that finally turned down our street. "That's me," she said. "We're here for a market valuation," the woman said. "Cash out, refinance, pre-check." She tapped her tablet. "Shouldn't take long if we can get a look at the interior." My chest went warm and then cold in a swing I've come to recognize this month. Nora tried to keep her voice casual and failed. "Of course," she said. "We're just in the middle of tidying." The appraiser stepped into the living room and took 3 photos in quick succession. She glanced at the boxes by the dining arch, at the taped note about mediation still stuck above the thermostat, at the old dent in the carpet where Mom's dresser used to sit. "Do you have any occupants besides you?" she asked, scribbling. I could feel my pulse in my palms. Nora did the thing where she pretends silence is authority. The appraiser looked at me because I was standing there with car keys and a face that knew too much. "I have a recorded right of occupancy," I said, calm, no flourish. "With a schedule for move-out signed last week." The woman's eyes flicked to Nora, back to me, then down to her tablet. "Noted," she said, and the tone was neutral, but it had the weight of a stamp. She moved through the house efficiently, measuring windows, snapping shots of the kitchen, asking about the roof patch, and writing down the date. When she left, the silence in the living room rang. Nora let out a breath like she'd been holding it since the car turned onto our street. "You couldn't keep that to yourself for 20 minutes, she said, voice tight. "We've been waiting all week for this to go through." I felt the blood rise in my face and kept my voice level. "It's recorded," I said. "They would see it when they pulled title. If not today, then Monday. You don't build a refinance on a secret." Ryan rolled his eyes hard enough to trip. "You're enjoying this," he said. I leaned against the wall because it felt better than letting my hands float useless in the air. "What I'm enjoying," I said, "is not being shoved out without a key to my name. What I'm not enjoying is how often you pretend paper is optional." Dad set a hand on the truck bed and squeezed the metal like it could absorb what he didn't say. "Let's keep moving," he said quietly, and I picked up the next box. By noon, we had the dresser and the 2 bookshelves, the nightstand, the plant that refuses to die, and 5 boxes in the apartment. The landlord waved from the sidewalk and told Dad to park in the shade to save his back, and he looked like he might kiss her hand for thinking of that. We ate turkey sandwiches from the deli on the corner sitting on the floor because the chairs were still at the house. I drank 2 full bottles of water and held the cold plastic to the back of my neck until the heat in my face softened. Dad said the window light made the place look bigger, and I said it would look bigger as soon as my boxes became alive again. After we ate, I stood in the middle of the room and let a laugh out of my chest that surprised me. "I live here," I said, like I needed the air itself to agree out loud, and Dad nodded and said, "You do." The second trip back was the kitchen boxes and the small things, the lamp Mom bought me when I got my first job, the framed photo of us 3 at the zoo with the giraffe looking directly into the lens like it knew it was supposed to be the star, the jar of spare change that suddenly felt heavier than it ought to. Nora stayed out of the way for 20 minutes and then appeared again with another note, this one written in tidy capital letters, "Any items left after Sunday 8 p.m. will be considered abandoned." She taped it above the arch and smoothed the corners like she had straightened a moral. I took a photo and met her eye. "We signed 3 months," I said. "Don't make me print the addendum again in bigger type." She looked at the camera on my phone and then at the floor, and for a second I saw the tired child behind her cheekbones. "I just want it finished," she said, almost too quietly to hear. "I want this to stop breathing down my neck." I opened my mouth to say me too, and then shut it because saying it wouldn't make either of us feel better. By 4 we were down to the last items in my room, the mattress, the mirror, the shoebox with Mom's ring in the blue velvet pouch. I picked up the box and held it like it might become air if I stopped thinking about it. Dad put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "Do you want me to carry that one?" he asked. I shook my head. "No," I said. "I need to know how it feels to lift it all the way to the truck." He nodded and stepped back. We carried the mattress through the living room like a sail. Ryan held the door without comment. The neighbor with the garage sale clipboard waved from her porch like we were a parade she hadn't paid to see. When we got the last load into the apartment, the sun had decided to tilt and the room looked warmer. I set the shoebox on the kitchen counter and opened it carefully. The ring glinted the same way it had under a fluorescent light in a hospital room when Mom asked me to take it for safekeeping and then never used the word again. I slid it onto my finger for 1 second, then back into the box because I am only sentimental in short doses. I turned my phone over to check messages and saw 3 in a row, one from Shay, one from Pastor Matt, one from a number I didn't recognize. Shay wrote, "Heads up, writers spooked the underwriter. They'll need a written waiver to fund before the occupancy period expires," which made my stomach curl in on itself even as my head nodded yes. Pastor Matt wrote, "Proud of you. If you want the church folding tables for tomorrow, they're in the closet by the choir robes. No one will miss them," which made me smile. The unknown number was the appraiser. Standard follow-up. Lender will require acknowledgement of recorded occupancy rights. They may ask for your signature to waive before term. You do not have to sign. I read that last line twice and felt the temperature in the room drop in the way that has nothing to do with air. I carried the phone out to the stairwell where the light was cooler and called Shay. She picked up on the second ring and didn't bother with hello. "They're going to want you to sign a tenant estoppel or a waiver," she said. "Don't sign anything without terms you can live with. Waiver is leverage. Leverage is not a bat. It's a doorstop." I sat on the step and put my head against the rail. I don't want to be the reason her refinance fails, I said. I also don't want to be treated like luggage while I'm moving. Shay hummed in that way that means she's thinking in bullet points without giving me a list. Then write your own conditions, she said. Nothing wild. An actual apology in writing. Reimbursement for moving truck gas and your P.O. box. Confirmation in the settlement that the rider stays on record until your move date so you can sleep. You're not asking for the moon. You're asking to not be erased. My chest loosened. Will that make me the villain? I asked. You were the villain when you refused to leave in 48 hours, she said, dry. Villains with folders get things done. At 7, as Dad and I were setting the mattress into the frame in my new bedroom and arguing about whether the headboard was even, my phone buzzed again, Nora. The lender needs you to sign a waiver so we can close before the end of the month, her text read. They said it's standard. Can I bring it by? I looked at Dad and tilted the screen. He pressed his lips together. Your call, he said. I typed back, bring it tomorrow at 2. Bring a check for $212, $18 for my moving expenses and P.O. box. And bring an apology letter that says exactly this. I was wrong to give you 48 hours. I was wrong to change the rules midweek. I'm sorry. Then we can talk about a waiver effective the day I turn in my key. I stared at the words on the screen, thumb hovering over send. Then I added, I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to keep a record that doesn't make my head spin. I hit send and felt like I had stepped over a line I'd been drawing in pencil since the first Wednesday. She didn't reply that night. I slept in my new apartment and woke up twice thinking I was home and once sure I'd left something burning. Morning brought the sound of someone walking a dog upstairs and the smell of toast from a neighbor I hadn't met yet. Dad brought coffee and a bag of those muffins that are more cake than breakfast and looked around like he was trying to memorize this place so he could picture me here when the house got loud. At noon, I went back to the house for the last 2 boxes and a folding chair. Nora was at the table with a stack of papers and a face that said she'd been up late with a calculator. Ryan was nowhere to be seen. She didn't look at me as I passed through, then called my name without getting up. 2 o'clock, she said, voice flat. Bring your pen. I arrived at 2 on the dot with my folder and a small spiral notebook because writing in front of people makes them remember that words live outside of phones. Nora had a manila envelope ready and a check open on the table with a pen across the line. I wrote your number, she said, and I glanced at the amount, $212. 18 exact down to the cents from my text. We need you to sign this, she added, sliding a 2-page waiver my way. It said I acknowledged the writer, that I agreed not to assert it beyond a date certain, that I would not impede closing. It also said nothing about the 3 months we had written, nothing about locks, nothing about apologies. I slid it back. We'll swap, I said. Check and letter for a signed waiver effective the day I return the key. The addendum remains. The writer remains on record until then. She took a breath and set her jaw. Do I have to put the words you wrote? She asked, and I nodded. You do, I said. Because that's the thing I need to stop hearing in my head at 3 in the morning. She stared at the blank paper for a full 30 seconds like she was negotiating with herself. Then she wrote the line exactly as I'd typed it for her. Her handwriting is neater than mine. She signed it and dated it and slid it across next to the check. I put both into my folder and took out my pen and signed the waiver with my own neat script, adding the line effective upon return of keys on the first Friday of October, because Shay had told me to put calendar into everything. Nora watched my hand move like she couldn't decide whether to snap or thank me. We're done, she asked. We're on schedule, I corrected, and something about the word schedule made the room feel less hot. I walked out to the driveway with Dad and stretched my back because somewhere between 29 and now I turned into a person who knows when she's carried too many boxes. The neighbor with the garage sale clipboard waved again and asked if this was the last of it. Almost, I said. One more Saturday. She nodded and said if I needed an extra hand, she had a grandson who owed her a favor and could lift things that would make my back cry. I laughed, for real this time, and said I might take her up on it. Dad put his arm across my shoulders briefly and then let it fall. I'm proud of you, he said. Not for winning. For not yelling. I smiled and blinked fast because my throat felt thick. I yelled into a folder, I said. Apparently that's my new thing. The last week of September moved in steps you could count. I changed my driver's license address at the BMV, and the clerk told me stories about people who try to keep two addresses like they're collecting rare stamps. I hung a cheap curtain rod in my new place and took it down and hung it again when I realized it listed to the right because the wall is old and means well. I bought a little rug for the kitchen that looks like fall leaves if you squint and keeps me from hearing my own footsteps. I started walking in the evenings along a loop that runs past the baseball fields where little kids chase balls until the sky is pink and their parents clap at nothing in particular, like clapping is how you keep them from crying. I opened a new checking account at the credit union because the old one had too many joint memories, and when the teller asked for proof of address, I slid the lease across and watched her stamp it with the same satisfaction I get when I click a checkbox I've been meaning to click for days. On the first Friday of October, I carried the last small box out to Dad's truck and set my house key on the kitchen counter next to the thermostat note as a private joke for myself. I walked through each room, not saying goodbye because I hate saying goodbye to walls, just letting my eyes land on the places where time had left small marks. Nora stood in the doorway with a face I couldn't read. Ryan wasn't there. Someone had to be somewhere else for this to work. Do you need anything else? She asked, and the question landed like a real one for the first time in months. I shook my head. No, I said. I have what I need. She looked at the counter where the key sat and then at the folder in my arms. So do I, she said, and I wasn't sure whether she meant the waiver or the letter she wrote or the quiet. Outside, Dad climbed into the truck and exhaled, long. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said, and I meant it in a way that surprised me. We drove the 9 miles to my apartment with the game on low and the announcer explaining something obvious in a way that made it sound important. Dad carried the last box up the stairs despite my protest and then stood in the doorway and looked at the window like a man measuring light. I know I didn't handle it right, he said, soft. We thought we were building something that would make both of you feel secure. We didn't see the rest. I put the folder on the counter and put my hand on his arm. You did what you thought would help, I said. You picked a lawyer who uses riders that keep people safe. It saved me. It probably saved Nora too, even if she won't say that. He nodded and then grinned a little. Your mother would hate this rug, he said, and I laughed so hard I had to sit down because it was true and because it was the first time all month her name had been a soft thing. He kissed the top of my head the way he did when I was small and left without making it about whether he would miss me here or whether I would be all right alone. Sunday church smelled like coffee and floor wax and whatever casserole someone reheated in the kitchen, which is to say it smelled like home. Pastor Matt asked if anyone had folding tables to return and then caught my eye and smiled because a joke shared is a kind of relief. After the service, he asked if I wanted to help with the youth car wash next Saturday, and I said yes, because I am a person who does better when my hands are wet and the sun is on my neck. Aunt June pressed a bag of apples into my arms and told me to make something of them, and I said I'd try. On the steps, the neighbor with the garage sale clipboard patted my arm and said she liked my new street and that their trash day was Wednesday, and I thanked her like she'd told me a secret. That afternoon, the Guardians blew a late lead in a way that made the announcer sigh like a man who has a file of phrases labeled disappointment, and I sat on my floor surrounded by half-unpacked boxes and felt calm for the first time in 61 days. I wrote Nora a short note, not a letter for court, not a performance, just a line that said, "The key is on the counter. The waiver is effective. I hope you breathe easier." 10 minutes later, she replied with a photo of the key and one word, "received," and I took that as what it was, a ceasefire signed without ceremony. If you were hoping for a firework, I don't have one. My revenge ended up being quiet and full of words I could hand to a stranger if they asked why I didn't vanish when told. I used a writer I didn't know existed until I read it twice in the light of a diner and a friend who underlines for a living and a pastor who sets folding chairs in a square so people can talk without shouting. I asked for a check that matched my receipts and a sentence written exactly as I needed it to be written because sometimes that's the only way to move the knot in your chest. I didn't wreck her refinance. I said yes when conditions felt like respect. I didn't slam the door. I put my key on a counter in a kitchen that smelled like lemon cleaner and old arguments, and I walked out under a sky that finally remembered how to be blue. On the second Saturday, I stood in the church parking lot with a hose and a stack of towels and watched a line of cars pull in with kids hanging out of windows and a radio playing a song I didn't recognize. Pastor Matt sprayed a minivan by accident and laughed, and the driver laughed back, and somewhere across town Nora probably paid a utility bill on time and didn't tape a note above a thermostat because the habit had finally let go. Dad stopped by with lemon bars and a joke about his back that wasn't actually a joke, and he told me the appraisal had come in fine and the loan would fund next week, and that he'd framed the little letter where Nora wrote the words I needed and put it in his desk because he is sentimental in secret. I told him my landlord's pies were better than her paint color choices, and he said he'd bring a brush next week if I wanted the living room to look less like a school hallway. That night, I arranged my books on the cheap shelves in a way that made sense to no one but me, cooked eggs in a pan that used to sit on a different stove, and opened the window wide because the air had finally decided to be kind. The radio mumbled about a city council proposal to fix the timing on the light at Sunbury and Maine, which made me smile because I had complained about that exact light in a meeting once, and it felt good to know I'd be the one stuck at it now and then without thinking about who else wanted me out of their way. I slid Mom's ring out of the blue box and wore it while I washed the plates and then put it back where it belongs because some things you don't test drive when you're alone. I put the folder, the one with the writer and the waiver and the apology, on the top shelf of my closet in a plastic sleeve, not because I plan to use it again, but because keeping paper tidy is how I breathe. On the last Sunday of the month, I walked past my old street on my way to the store for milk and saw the trash cans lined up neatly, all the lids down, the kind of order that looks ordinary unless you know the months it took to learn it. I didn't stop. I didn't need to. I turned toward my apartment and counted the blocks out of habit, and when I got to my door, I lifted and pushed at the same time so the old frame wouldn't catch. Inside, the room was bright even though it had rained in the night. I put the milk in the fridge, turned the game on low, and let the ordinary noises do the work they always do, one inning, one sigh, one small plan at a time.